Welcome everybody to the Indiana Town Hall, virtual town hall in partnership with the Future of Tech Commission. We are delighted you are here today. My name is Roberto Gallardo and I'm the director of the Purdue Center for Regional Development and a Purdue Extension Specialist. I am delighted to host all of you here today on behalf of Purdue. We have set up a great panel to discuss with you all about many of the situations around rural connectivity. Today's discussion is being driven by the Future of Tech Commission, a nonpartisan commission whose goal is to advise the current administration around how to create an inclusive national technology policy that works for everyone. Indiana is one of about 10 locations around the country that have been selected for a commission town hall event and is one of the only events to focus on the unique challenges and opportunities facing rural and agricultural communities when it comes to the future of technology. We have a packed agenda today that includes leaders in digital equity, access, and economic development from across the state. We have two panel discussions today, as well as a set of remarks from one of our leaders here at Purdue on engineering and broadband accessibility. In each of these panels, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. The commission wants to hear your questions. And this session is going to be recorded. The Q&A panel is open for you to post your questions starting now. We will be taking those questions throughout the event. To open our event, I'd like to introduce Secretary Margaret Spellings, Co-Commissioner of the Future of Tech Commission and former U.S. Secretary of Education, to welcome all of you on behalf of the Commission. Secretary?
Thank you, Roberto, and thanks also to my friend, President of Purdue, Mitch Daniels, and the entire team at Purdue for doing such a terrific job of organizing this critical event on a critical issue for our country and for your state. I also want to thank especially you, Roberto, for bringing your wealth of knowledge as a thought leader around these issues, especially with the focus on rural ubiquity and equity. You all are really leading the way in Indiana. We have a lot to learn from you. So congratulations on all you've accomplished, and we're eager to learn from you as we inform our work. As you mentioned, I am a co-commissioner of the Future of Tech Commission, along with my fellow commissioners, former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, and CEO and founder of Common Sense Media, Jim Steyer. With the support and urging of the White House and the Federal Communications Commission, the Future of Tech Commission is working to gather input around the country at events like this on the urgent tech policy challenges and opportunities facing our economy and our democracy. The goal of our commission is to release a comprehensive blueprint with a clear call to action for our nation. We all know how critical these issues are. We deal with them every day. This town hall is part of our work to convene the American public, leaders and experts from across sectors to inform an inclusive tech policy for our nation. While today's event, as you said, is focusing on the needs of rural communities in particular and digital access, we have and will be conducting other town halls across the country on other key issues like platform accountability, innovation, market competition, and privacy. And we may get into some of those today as well. We welcome your participation at any other of our events and any location on any topic. Please visit our website, futureoftechcommission.org, for more information and with links to register for other events. Additionally, while we're excited to hear from our invited speakers and panelists, we also, of course, want to hear from the public. And I encourage you to use the Q&A feature today during our panels for questions. Roberto and others will be engaging with those today. We'll also be posting a link to the chat to the public input form so that we can gather written commentary around the country. And we'll also be sending a follow-up email to everyone who is registered today. The written form will allow you to provide your thoughts on this topic as well as any other topic that we're interested in working on. So thank you all in advance for your contributions to our event today. And without further ado, back to our wonderful expert, Dr. Roberto Gallardo, to lead us through our discussion this afternoon. Thank you,
Thank you,
Roberto.
Secretary. I appreciate that. So before we jump into our first cohort of panelists that I look forward to the discussion, I would like to set the stage as to why this is an issue, but more importantly, how can we solve it? As the Secretary mentioned, this is one of multiple town halls, but the panel we've convened today is really about practitioners and experts that are in the field learning how to deal with these issues. So we're going to hear from them. I'm going to go ahead and just share a couple of slides quickly on this. Mary, can you give me the presentation rights, please? Just quickly to set the stage around what it is we're going to be talking, and then I'm going to introduce the panelists, and we're going to begin our discussion. So to set the stage, what is digital inclusion? Not to go too much in the weeds, but when we say digital inclusion is the adoption meaningful benefits, meaning those are the key words. Everybody can adopt, they can use it in a meaningful way, and it will bring benefits to them. There are 3 levels to this. It's the typical yes, no access. It's a very complex issue. The second level is more on the differences of internet use. And the third level is the outcomes due to that access and to that internet use. So when you're digital inclusive, you cover all of these dimensions, and you really end up having adoption and meaningful benefits in your community. So here's a map of Indiana. We're showing 120 down based on FCC data, and it's not 25.3. And the reason for that is because of COVID. We all know that perhaps 3 megs up is not sufficient, but more importantly is because neighboring states of Indiana are shooting for 120. So this shows you there's a big divide. The gray area shows those that have access, while the shades of orange show those that do not. And then the graph below it shows the percent of housing units in rural areas. 40% did not have access as of June 2020 to the 120 versus 4% in urban areas. Here is another one that's very interesting. It shows the homework gap and the senior gap. I know it's very busy, but the key thing here is that we have, for example, 25% of homes in Indiana either used a mobile device only or had no devices at home. They are on the wrong side of the divide. We also found that about 27% of homes in Indiana use only cellular data that have limited data plans and or no internet access. So you can see here that the playing field is not equal. And so we are working hard to address these issues, and the experts that are going to join us today will pitch in on that. This one is very telling. If you go from left to right, you will see income, household income, and then the share of homes with no internet access. Notice those making less than $10,000, 50% in rural areas did not have internet access at home. If you move to the right, you see that bar go down. So we have an inequality situation here tied to income. And then we also, this one is very important. This one shows the percent of jobs over the gain in jobs over the past decade. In Indiana grew about 114,000 jobs. But then we broke that net value into those jobs requiring low digital skills, medium digital skills, and high digital skills. And you can see that the net positive was mainly because of medium and high digital skills, and not low skills are disappearing. Low digital skill jobs are disappearing. So this, I think, hopefully sets the stage to this important issue. And now I'm going to turn over to the, let me handle here my, I don't know how to, oh, here it is. Okay. So without further ado, let me introduce our great set of panelists. Each of them will have a specific question. Then at the end, we will have an overall discussion. And then at the end, we will address some of your questions. So we're going to start with Matt Crouch. Matt Crouch is the Deputy Director of the Office of Community and Rural Affairs and has served Okra since 2007. He is a graduate of IU, Indiana University, and started at Okra as a community liaison, project manager, senior project manager, and deputy director in 2017. In these roles, he coordinated the Indiana Main Street Program, Hometown Collaboration Initiative, the Broadband Next Level Connections, the COVID-19 response, such as Rural Road to Recovery, and others. So this agency is now tasked with the broadband funding for the state. And I will ask Matt his question as soon as I'm done introducing the rest of the panelists. We also have Ernie Holtry. Ernie has been serving as the Indiana Broadband Office Project Manager for the last year and a half. Previously, he served as the East Central Community Liaison for the Indiana Office of Community and Rural Affairs. In his role, Ernie manages the Broadband Ready Communities Program, website redevelopment, social media, statistical analysis, and program implementation. Ernie was integral to the 2020 finalization of the State Broadband Strategic Plan and Indiana Broadband Office Road to Recovery Plan. Next, we have Lee Llewellyn. Lee currently is serving as the first president, chief executive officer of the Indiana Economic Development Association, the statewide association for Indiana's economic development professionals. IEDA's 400 members represent all of Indiana's 92 counties. Lee also serves as the CEO for the IEDA Foundation. And last but not least is Dr. Jason Henderson, a nationally recognized expert in agriculture and rural issues. Dr. Henderson is the Senior Associate Dean in the Purdue University College of Agriculture and Director of Purdue Extension. In this role, he leads statewide public engagement in research-based education in 4-H youth development, agriculture, natural resources, community development, and health and human sciences. As Purdue's Assistant Vice President for Engagement, he provides leadership in university-wide initiatives that connect Purdue expertise and resources to statewide needs and helps form effective partnerships to grow Indiana's economy and improve quality of life for its residents. So these are our first panelists. So now I'm going to turn over to Matt. Glad to see you here, Matt. Thank you for joining us. So as part of this discussion, as the agency managing state broadband funds, what are the challenges and opportunities you see communities face when securing these funds?
Yeah, thank you, Roberto. Thank you for having us be a part of this. Honored to represent Governor Holcomb and Lieutenant Governor Crouch as part of the Office of Community and Rural Affairs. We've been fortunate enough that the legislature and the governor have worked to initially give us $100 million to help out rural communities around the state, and then this past legislative session, they've invested another $250 million into funding. And so, we've already actually been able to fund $80 million worth of projects, around the state. And so, some of the projects, the challenges that we're really running into, especially when relating to our rural communities, is their ability to find the right partners and to ensure that the partners are identifying the gaps, because ultimately the funding that, we have available is, and, typically available for broadband is, the lead applicant is the provider themselves. And so there's little room for the community to be part of that process. Now, one of the things that we've done as we've gradually rolled this out initially and started to revise is to increase that importance and participation in the application process and the program and project development. But it's a challenge to ensure that good partners that are willing to listen to you are the ones that are applying for these funds. And so, we've had communities reach out to us on funded projects, and they didn't even know that the application was submitted on their behalf until it was funded. And so that is certainly a challenge that we've been working very closely with our partner agency, the Indiana Broadband Office, that Ernie's going to be talking in just a few minutes, on educating our communities about these opportunities. And so, looking towards the opportunities, with rural communities, as with everything, it comes down to a lot of capacity issues. And so, we're fortunate enough to not only be able to work with the Indiana Broadband Office, but to work with our close partners at PCRD on building capacity through programs, because so oftentimes, it's the same 5 or 7 people that serve on 10 or more boards. And so they only have a limited capacity. And so one of the things that we continuously stress is the importance of getting a broadband committee together to focus on this and ensure that they're discussing these issues with all the key stakeholders to make sure that there's no one, that is left out. And so I think that is an important decision to make early on, and to have them carry on those conversations and really make sure that the residents' voices are heard and they're driving the conversations. And I think they'll ultimately drive us toward, a successful plan, implementation plan. We were able to, we also administer our community development block grant for rural communities. And so we were able to roll out a planning program in partnership with PCRD to create solid plans of action, of identify the gaps. And so I think that's so important, especially since one of the greatest opportunities we have right now is with all the federal funds through ARPA, right? You need to have a plan, you need to have communities involved. You need to have those key stakeholders driving this. And so now you have to decide exactly how are you going to implement and utilize those funds effectively. And so the most important piece that we continuously stress is to pause and plan and leverage those funds to the greatest extent possible. And so that's something that we're really striving for in Indiana, is to ensure that their funds, since they are flexible at the local level, that they're holding those back and seeing what the state is going to be doing with our funds, seeing what the federal government's making available within their funding parameters. And so I think that kind of the last point I would say is for local communities to remember that they're not in this alone, that they're not the only ones that are facing these broadband challenges. There are others that are facing it and coming up with unique ideas of how to overcome that. And they also have good partners at the state, not only within government, but also good university partners as well. And so it's continuing that conversation, and you cannot over communicate on terms of broadband in this time. And it may not have worked in another community, but it may work in your community.
Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate that insight. We're going to circle back with another question for all of the panelists. I encourage our listeners to submit questions, please. We through the Q&A panel, and we will try and get to them. Next is Ernie. As program manager, Ernie, I know as Matt, you have a statewide view. So from your perspective, what can be done to further help providers as they build or upgrade infrastructure throughout the state, from a state perspective and from a federal perspective?
Thank you, Roberto. Appreciate everyone's time today and for the invite. Send greetings from Lieutenant Governor Crouch and her entire executive staff, along with the Office of OCRA, the Office of Community and Rural Affairs, and then our Director of Broadband Opportunities, Scott Rudd, who Lieutenant Governor Crouch was very insightful and brought Scott on board several years ago. And I was fortunate to join Scott, as Roberto said, about a year and a half ago. One thing that Matt and I probably should have done is we probably should have gotten together and talked about some of our points. Matt, you took my first good one, but you know what? I can expand on that a little bit. Capacity. One of the things that we really try to focus on is an understanding of capacity. When we use that so often in broadband terms, we're talking about speed and reliability and what's the capacity of the fiber or the wireless that's being laid or deployed. But the local capacity, the provider capacity, and the provider goals. Very important. Our office tries to spend a lot of time in conjunction with OCRA, trying to encourage the local elected officials, the economic development people, the schools, the hospitals, anchors, institutions, et cetera, to engage with the providers. Ask the providers what they need. How can we as locals assist you to build your network X number of miles to the north, south, east, or west to pick up X number of additional residents that are lacking currently. And also trying to highlight every opportunity we get with the providers to reach out to the locals and to use us as that conduit if you're not getting those replies, or if you're maybe reaching out to the wrong individual. That capacity is huge. And for the locals to understand the provider goals. What does the provider have in mind? As Matt mentioned, the majority of the funding goes directly to the providers. That being said, are the incumbent providers in your area looking to expand? Which direction are they looking to expand? How many customers are they looking to pick up? Understanding the capacity of the provider as well as what their goals may be. And then where can the community, the local elected officials, the community and local government jump in and assist with that? Adoption, put that in one of your initial slides, Roberto, hugely important. What provider is going to want to build out to an area where they pass 100 homes and 16 or 21 or 36 of them take the service? What can the locals do to encourage that? Is that money? Is that education? What does that look like to adopt that? A higher adoption rate decreases the cost per passing, per connection, and return on investment is less number of months than fewer individuals adopting. Also, local units of government, compiling assets. What assets are already in the community? How can we free up those assets for the providers to take advantage of? Grain silos, towers, any pole attachment issues, permitting. How do we streamline the permits? How do we make it easy for the permits to be submitted? How do we answer those questions in a timely manner? And then one of the talking points that I like to use is, how can we as the locals tell the provider yes as opposed to no? Yes, you can do this instead of no, you can't. And if it's no, you can't, then let's sit down and talk about it. And you name 10 things that you want to do in this project. We have problems with 2 of them. Let's hammer those out. Let's get started on the other 8 that's going to work. Let's hammer the rest out. Let's figure it out, and let's sit down and do it together. Matt hit right off the bat on the importance of a task force. And Roberto, you mentioned our involvement with the Broadband Ready Communities program. Our office is, I think this was actually a brainstorm that Lee had and approached Scott and I with what we're calling a Broadband Playbook for Success. And it's going to be a top 10 list of things that local communities can do to encourage build out into their community. Number 1 is start a task force. Who needs to be at the table? Number 2 is become a broadband ready community to signal to the providers and to the residents. Letters of support are always available from the governor's office, the lieutenant governor's office, to assist with any of that federal or state funding that could be available that those kind of things could involve. And one thing that I'll close with that Scott Rudd likes to say is investment goes where investment is welcome. And everybody wants broadband build out, but how are the locals actively working with the providers to welcome that investment in the door?
Thank you, Ernie. I really appreciate that. Indeed, right? Treat investment as you would any industrial prospect into broadband investment into your community. Thank you, Ernie. And related to that, I know you hammered on adoption. So let me shift gears here a little bit and pivot more in towards adoption and utilization and the impacts that it could be having or is having on rural economic development. For that, we're going to turn to Lee. Lee, as you remember, he's the CEO of the Indiana Economic Developers Association, who he hears from economic developers around the state. So Lee, from your perspective, how is access to or lack of rural broadband changing rural economic development, including agriculture?
Roberto, thank you for the opportunity today, and thanks to Secretary Spellings for giving us all an opportunity to provide input. I think I have to start by really sort of putting economic development into perspective today. And I'll just share a conversation that we had with 3 of our members yesterday, and we're talking about our legislative agenda for 2022. And all 3 of them said, none of us are in the process right now of trying to attract new companies to our areas. And we think of economic development as being about attracting companies to an area. And they said, the problem we have right now is we don't have enough people to work the jobs we have right now. And we're spending most of our time now as economic developers trying to attract workers, families, new individuals to our communities. And I bring that up as how the role of economic developers has changed and what role broadband plays within that changing role. And 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the question that all economic developers got was, can you get broadband to the industrial park if I bring my company there? And that was the question that economic developers were answering. Today, as they are focusing on how do we attract human beings to our communities, broadband has stopped being an afterthought and something that we think of as coming to one place, and that's an industrial park. And the answer is, how do we create broadband connectivity to everyone, and so that we can assure that when individuals come to our communities, whether it's a rural or urban, but when individuals come to our community, they are connected to the outside world. Their children can be connected to education. As we start to see opportunities for people to work from home, and we see people selecting more rural areas because of the quality of life, but that connectivity is critical. And so the whole notion of why broadband is important to economic development has taken on a much greater proportion in terms of the capacity, the need, and it's not, again, just to one place, but it's really about how do we promote that overall quality of life and that connectivity, and that does not put one community or one area at a disadvantage to others. So no longer do we see broadband and economic development as an afterthought. Do we see it as a competitive advantage because we have it and somebody else doesn't? Right now, it is yes or no. And if it's no, we don't have it. We are putting an entire community, we're putting entire counties at a competitive disadvantage. For now, it's about how do we maintain not only the workforce, but keeping that workforce so that we retain the companies that we have. And as Roberto knows, we're also working in a lot of those rural communities to think about how we attract value-added agriculture. How do we better leverage the agricultural production that's taking place in Indiana's rural communities? Use that to attract food processing, value-added agriculture, which means also that it's an added need and incentive for broadband to be in those communities. So my summary comment is 10 years ago, broadband was almost an afterthought, or was something that we thought of as exclusively only an industrial necessity for economic development. And now that necessity extends to every household and our capacity to attract workforce and retain them. So thanks, Roberto.
Thank you, Lee. And yes, indeed, you know, the economic development landscape is changing. And so I'm glad you pointed that out. We will circle back again for a broader discussion of what the federal government can do along these lines. Now we pivot or shift to Dr. Henderson. Dr. Henderson is the Purdue Extension Director, so he also has a statewide feel of what's going on. So Dr. Henderson, as the leader of a statewide network of offices and educators, what role is your organization playing in helping farmers digitize?
Yeah, well, thanks, Roberto, for inviting me today, and also thanks to the Secretary Spellman and all her work with the commission. This is a hugely important topic, and is just echoing what Lee said. Digital technology and access to it in agriculture is a necessity anymore. It's not just a luxury to have of very different things. And so when we think about our goal is to improve the financial, environmental, and social sustainability of agriculture in every corner of Indiana. But in order to do that, what we need to do, in my mind, is how do we use digital technology to enhance the decision makings of farmers in real time? And so just a couple of examples of 5 years ago, we purchased 20 drones in extension. We spread them across the state of Indiana to help on-farm, conduct on-farm demonstrations to show farmers what they could do to monitor crops that were grown, to fly over and watch animals as they're out in different pastures of different things, combining it with other sensors to figure out how can we enhance agricultural production and give farmers access to data to help them improve their decision making. The challenge we have is that when you fly over a drone over just one field, that's a lot of data. And because of the lack of broadband access, many of the farmers weren't able to take that information back to their house and upload it up into the cloud. And the next generation of this technology is going to link it They're going to link what we're collecting with UAVs to the UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles. That you have things flying in the air, you have UGVs on the ground, collecting data with the soil and various different temperatures and water and all of that. But how do you match that together to have them make better decisions on, okay, do I have to spray the whole field for a pest invasion, or can I only do part of it? Not only does that have a financial benefit, but it also has an environmental benefit to not just rural communities, but every community that's involved in that. And that's just one aspect of it, and those different things. And so part of it is helping farmers adapt and adopt. You talk to them today, there's hundreds of computers in every large machine that goes across the field. But how does that machine connect it? And how is that going to work? You talk to farmers, one of their biggest fears now is not that the machine, as they're planting season and harvest season, the machine breaks. And farmers have done a good job of getting themselves mechanically inclined. At least you can fix things up with a little bit of duct tape and baling wire. They can make things work. But their biggest fear now, and when you talk with them, is the computer goes down because they don't know how to fix that. And you got to bring the technician in from a long ways. But if you had broadband access to the field, maybe they could do it remotely. I don't know of where these aspects are. And so you have all this technology that's emerging to help people make decisions. And you have big data, you have artificial intelligence that's coming in here, dashboards and decision-making tools. But how do you get it access? And it's not just to the farmhouse, which is sometimes outside the community, which is the next step. But sometimes it's into the back 40.
Right.
Of those aspects of it. And so that's the things that we're looking at of how do you use all of this digital technology. And the fundamental thing is the broadband pipeline and how big that pipeline is, who has access to it, and how can you share it for many different things. And so that for us is the future going forward of just helping agriculture make better decisions, both from a financial standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, and a social standpoint of all of those things, let alone of selling their product. What we've seen over the last year with the supply disruptions in agriculture, how do you go to direct marketing? But if you don't have broadband access, your direct marketing is very limited compared to what it could be of various different things. So when we look at it in agriculture, it's the next generation step. And we're building our roles of building adoption because you can have the pipeline and then we have to get people ready to use it on that frame. And so now that we're getting farmers ready to use it, they're getting a little impatient. I want that pipeline out here because I got the tools. Let's go on that frame. So with that, I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson. So yeah, just like you alluded, so it's not only the connectivity, right? It's several steps. It's the adoption, the utilization, the skills, right? Now they're afraid what happens if the computer goes down or if my machine does not connect to the internet. So that's another big piece of this. Thank you, everybody, for such a great discussion. Now I'm going to pivot and I'm going to ask you to put on your magic hat. And if you had a magic wand, from each of your unique perspectives and considering state resources and policies, but also the federal government, if you had a magic wand, how would you solve rural connectivity and improve digital agriculture? Notice that I'm asking for how do you solve? We've heard that there are barriers and challenges, so you have a magic wand, and so go at it. Anybody is free to speak. If not, I'm going to have to point out some very brilliant folks here. So who's first?
Well, I don't know that we need a magic wand maybe right now. And as Ernie and Matt know, we've been having these conversations about there are tremendous, maybe a once in a lifetime opportunity in terms of financial resources that are available to extend broadband. And our biggest concern right now, so if I had a magic wand, I would try to figure out how to get a room big enough so we could get everybody in there at one time and say, let's talk about the dollars we have and how we use those dollars, how we stage those dollars, how we put those dollars together that we're not duplicating, that we're not leaving gaps. So I would just use my magic wand to create some sort of magical communication that would allow leaders and many of these communities to figure out how to work together and leverage and stage and coordinate the dollars that we have that's in probably what is a once in a lifetime opportunity, whether it's the American Rescue Plan, whether it's coming through READY, whether it's dollars that are coming through perhaps USDA rural, other dollars that were put together by the state legislature. I think our biggest concern right now is all of those pieces aren't necessarily talking to one another, and we aren't figuring out how we leverage those dollars for multiple impact. So, Kazam, there's my magic wand. Everybody talk to one another. Let's figure it out.
Great theme, collaboration. Collaboration would be.
Oh, is that what I said? Okay, sure, collaboration.
So Lee, I would add to that, I would give you a magic key so that you could lock the door and leave and don't let them out until they come up with a solution. And every hour you turn up the temperature to that room to make them uncomfortable.
I was thinking a little bit less coercive, but I guess whatever it takes. And part of my point, yes, it's collaboration. And part of the point is, there is an unprecedented amount of resources right now that are being devoted to this question, and what we may be lacking and what may cause us to squander this opportunity is the lack of collaboration. So I'll adopt that word as though I actually used it, and I think that's what I would wish for.
Thank you, Lee. Anybody else?
Yeah, seriously, I think that would just real quick. I think it's a public-private partnership. And I think that we just have to go back and treat, many people have said this is not original to me, is we got to treat broadband like electricity of the 1930s. And just say that it's a necessity for our families, our communities, our farms, our businesses, and just say it's a requirement that we have to have and make these investments. And it's going to take, federal funding and state funding and local funding and private sector investments of making these things happen. Of where it is, but it just has to come down to, I think, for a commitment that we're going to figure out how to do this. And it means that people are going to have to give up a little bit of their turf, what they view as their turf, and partner and collaborate in that different way. But I think that's just a commitment from our leaders, both in the private and public sector, to come together to make this happen.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson. Any other thoughts about the magic wand? Matt, Ernie?
Well, we'll see what Matt says next, but I think we may have consensus on this point. The topic that I was going to bring up was exactly what Lee and Jason have brought up. I could add a little bit more. Check your agenda at the door. The locals, the state individuals, the federal, the providers, economic development, anchor institutions, businesses, residents, check your agenda at the door. How can we get this done? And it's not all I get everything I want and Matt gets nothing he wants. It is a give and take. How does that work? The magic wand does solve that. Unfortunately, we don't have one of those currently. Maybe up there at Purdue, they can design one in the next couple of years. That being said, we also know, and I think it's been discussed already, the money alone is not going to solve it. We have projects that were awarded years and years and years ago that are now finishing, and the speed is completely obsolete. Going back to CAF and some of those type of things. Projects literally just finishing up or not being done, and 10-1 was the max. So how do we work through that red tape? How do we work through checking your agenda at the door? That would be my magic wand as well.
Thank you, Ernie. Matt?
I was on board until Dr. Henderson mentioned about locking me in the room and turning up the temperature, because I'm one of those people, I feel like it. So I'm not sure any longer. I guess because that was the line that I was thinking too, but I guess if that's already selected, the one that Roberto, you and I have talked about, it seems like hundreds of times, is wouldn't it be nice to actually have that magic wand and use it to get all the detailed information, to have a single map to know where the need lies, and and then we can figure out how to get there. So, I mean, that's the one that I would use. I mean, it seems like everybody, harps on the current mapping and capability of knowing who has it and who doesn't. So that's one I would use since the collaboration and working together with the Fed, state, and locals has already been used. So.
Interesting. Okay, so magic key in a big room, collaboration, leaving the agenda outside the door and mapping data, right? Which is, we know is a big issue. And we're going to get a little bit more into that in the second cohort of those that are like at the local level dealing with this situation. Any other comments regarding, from your unique perspective, regarding rural connectivity that you would like to share? We have one question in the Q&A. And so I'm gonna wait on that until you have some final comments, and then we're gonna go ahead and let you answer the the question that has come through. Any other final comments from your unique perspectives that you would like to share, potentially Congress and the White House could hear? Be nice.
Yeah.
Anything? You are shy. I know you're not this shy. Okay. So one of the questions we got here is, how feasible would it be for broadband to become a utility like rural electric as a federal program? After the challenges of the pandemic, don't you think all current students will demand broadband? So I know we don't have federal experts here or federal policymakers, but from your perspective and your dealings with the federal government, how feasible do you feel it would be to make broadband a utility?
Right. So I guess I'll just talk about a personal perspective. I live outside of town, about 8 miles. And the best thing that happened, my kids had to study at home. It was all online for a while during the pandemic. It was a real challenge until the rural electric cooperative that does our electricity put in broadband fiber out to all the homes in the area doing different things, and it was great and it worked really well. So I think you think about the rural, electric co-ops, what's their role? I think they have a huge role in some of these rural places of doing it, and some of these different aspects of it there. I think it's also, the small towns. My parents live in a town of 400 people. I mean, it's like the last place that you're going to put fiber in because there's only 400 people. But what it took was the town working collaboratively and like creating their own co-op type of structure environment and deciding that they're going to put it in themselves and making it happen. Mm-hmm. And those types of things. And so I think there's some opportunities out there for some of these federal programs to help and thinking about electricity in there. So I think those are some of the things that we need to think about and look at some of the institutions that we've had along for decades now, and working through them and with them to deliver some of this like a utility.
But I think, Sarah's question, hi, Sarah, good to see you on today. I think her question, though, talks about a paradigm shift in terms of just how we think about this. And I think that's where we keep getting hung up in sort of the public-private conversation, is that no, it's a luxury, and it is a luxury that is controlled by elements in the private sector, as opposed to, again, thinking of it as a utility. It's like water, it's like electricity. It has become, and that's, again, part of my point, it has become so pervasive that it is no longer perceived by people as an option. It has become, for households and people making decisions about how and where they're going to live, it is as crucial as any other utility. And perhaps even beyond utilities. I mean, we're now down to sort of this is becoming air. It's becoming a perception that people need broadband to exist in the culture today. It's no longer an option, but it's continued to be presented as though, well, you can or you can't, or you may or you may not. And so I think Sarah's question gets at, we have to change just our perspective of, it's no longer an option. You've got to figure out how you provide this as a vital human service as part of participating in a free economy. So, I mean, that would be my perspective.
And I would add, to that, as far as it becoming, a regulated utility, I know that then Governor Daniels, worked during his administration to deregulate the utility. And so I don't really necessarily see that happen. But as a father of an 11-year-old, if you're talking about panic setting in the household, Wi-Fi goes off and true panic sets in, and frustration and angry daughter comes out. So I hear that. And so I think one of the things that we've been able to accomplish this last legislative session is to try to find some other ways to utilize our funds to help in this avenue. And so, that's why this coming summer, we're going to be rolling out a subsidy program, and we're going to be rolling out a line extension, reverse auction, whatever you want to call that, a connectivity program as well, to really get those last homes that are kind of scattered, shotgun around the state, the hardest to hit. And so I think we're looking at some of those ways of getting broadband into homes that are struggling to, pay for it financially, or they're just so far geographically away from, other sources. And so, I agree the importance. And so I think, with some of the changes that we make to the program, it'll be exciting new opportunities to fill in those gaps around the state.
Thank you, Matt. And Ernie, speaking of collaboration and what Dr. Henderson alluded to about public-private partnerships, what is your feel as being in the Indiana Broadband office around that topic? I know there's been a couple of public-private partnerships that have been awarded funds, and what advice would you give communities to jumpstart, perhaps, lock them in a room and take the key like Dr. Henderson was saying, but what are your thoughts on this public-private dynamic? One of the points that I always try to hit on when I'm talking to local leadership is that engagement piece in that local public-private partnership. And that partnership, you own this much, I own this much, may not necessarily be that definition that we're working towards, but what are we doing together as a partnership to solve this problem? What can the locals bring to the table as far as ease of access, right away, pole access, connecting the ISP with the electric provider, all of those things, the creativity that we've seen, the rural counties or towns in Indiana that have quote unquote solved this problem, it's because of unique partnerships, creativity, and dialogue. So we try to stress those PPP every opportunity that we get. To the point of regulation as a utility, the true definition of the regulation, we're going to always be looking at a square peg in a round hole. But back when electricity was brought out to the majority of the country, they didn't have the technology that we have now, the equipment we have now, the know-how we have now, the speed and the access to resources, and it was done. Holes were dug in the ground, and poles were placed all over this country. Holes were buried in the ground, and cable was run all over this country. So we know it can be done. We should be able to do it 50, 60, 70 years later than when electricity was done. Being caught up on the definition and the regulation piece is maybe where the weeds are. And if we can stay out of the weeds, maybe that's a better place to be. Thank you, Ernie. We have a couple minutes left. I want to thank you all again for participating. Any concluding comments from any of you before we shift gears and bring on board Dean Mung? Any concluding comments that you would like to share with us today?
So I think a lot of our comments have been about access. When we talk about, on the backside, it's also about enhancing the skill sets. We talked a little bit about that, of what the demand is, of what's going on there. And sometimes some of it's that chicken and egg type of question. And so it's where do you start? Where do you come from? But I think you have to do both of it simultaneously, of just going out and showing businesses, okay, here's some of the things that you can do and use, how you can make better decisions if you have access to data and the tools and the understanding of this, and working it from that perspective as well, and that angle. And it's our businesses, it's also our farms, and I just think that I've come to understand one definition of old is when you have to have your kids figure out how to run the TV. On that aspect of it there. And as we think about the comments about this next generation that's coming up, I mean, their requirements for technology and what they're going to want to utilize and the choices that they're going to make, they're really going to depend, all these things of where it is. And so when Lee talks about, how do you do it? The age-old question, do jobs follow people or do people follow jobs? Well, I think COVID might have flipped it a little bit, where we might have thought like people follow jobs, but COVID with digital, maybe the jobs follow people. And one way we can do this to have our communities to attract people is having broadband access, especially that next generation. If you don't have it, they're not going to be attracted to you. And will the jobs follow after that? I don't know.
Great comment, Dr. Henderson. Thank you. Okay, well, I want to thank you all. If nobody has any concluding comments, Lee, I thought you were going to say something.
Well, I just want to thank Secretary Spellings and the Commission for giving Indiana an opportunity to weigh in on this and to hear us. And thank you, Roberto, and your colleagues at Purdue for hosting this, and again, giving us an opportunity to have a voice in this conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you. So next, what we're going to do is thank you all very much. What we're going to do next is I'm going to introduce Dean Mung, and I'm just checking here to make sure that we have everything. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so I just want to make sure that it's everything ready to go.
Hello, Roberto. This is Mung. How are you?
Oh, hello, Dean. How are you? Let me introduce you, and then I'll turn it over to you. Dean Mung is the Executive Vice President of Purdue University for Strategic Initiatives and Innovation Campus. He has also been the John A. Edwardson Dean of the College of Engineering and the Roscoe H. George Distinguished Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering since 2017. Purdue Engineering's ranking rose from number 9 to number 4 and became the largest engineering school ever, ranked top 5 in the U.S. During 2020, he served as the Science and Technology Advisor to the U.S. Secretary of State and the Chief Global Technology Office in the Department of State. Prior to 2017, he was the Arthur LeGrand Doty Professor of Electrical Engineering, the inaugural chair of Princeton Entrepreneurship Council, and director of Keller Center for Engineering Education at Princeton University. His research on communication networks received the 2013 Alan T. Waterman Award, the highest honor to a scientist or engineer under the age of 40 in the U.S. each year. Thank you, Dean, for being with us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Roberto, Secretary Spellings, the Commission, Dean Reingold, Dean Wolf, for inviting me to be part of this most critical conversation here about the rural and agricultural communities' broadband needs. And let me see if I can share my screen here. I hope you can see it now. Great, wonderful. Well, I can keep on going for hours and hours about this nerdy and societal topic, but I'm going to try to respect the allocation of the 5 minute and focus on just a few bullet points. First, it goes without saying at this point in our conversation and the national conversation that we have a dire need to provide and engineer, indeed, universal broadband access in this country. And we cannot afford to have, according to Commerce, 120 million Americans without a broadband internet. And here in the state of Indiana, we are doing quite well. I think there is a lot of room for further improvement, over 4 million people without broadband internet access. And the pandemic and the remote working and learning certainly accelerated and amplified the need to bridge this digital divide. And I'll focus on three particular kinds of technologies, either because they are new or because they have promising potential based on the latest development. One is actually wireline broadband. Now, of course, we talked about fiber, but depending on where you take the fiber, you may still need the copper wire to take you to the rest of the length, all the way to the kitchen and the study of the houses and the apartments, if that is the configuration you have there. And to the farm, if that's the digital agricultural application you're looking at there. So there has been a lot of advances in signal processing on copper wire, as well as in fiber, to give you multiple modalities and substantially enhance the throughput that you can deploy, even just on copper wire. The same old telephone wire, thanks to signal processing, there are additional capacity increase. A second track is the 5G broadband track, especially fixed wireless in mid-band and low band, including CBRS band. I'll come back to that in a minute. And these are the what we call prime real estate in the electromagnetic spectrum. They can propagate very well in the open air, and they can carry a very high throughput over a large distance. And the third one is satellite broadband. And satellite has traditionally suffered from high cost and high latency and low throughput occasionally too. But these days, with the LEO, low Earth orbit, small form factor satellites such as the CubeSat, constellation of dozens or hundreds of these LEO CubeSats, along with a optimized ground station configuration, can provide a very promising potential. You might have read newspaper articles that talked about how Starlink, for example, is one of the companies providing satellite broadband to every corner of the country or throughout the world. And the key challenge here is that while the latency has been reduced by quite a bit and throughput enhanced, still there is the ground station economic challenge that we have to face. So whether it's wireline signal processing, 5G mid to low band, or satellite LEO constellation with ground station, there are promising technologies coming our way. And indeed, Purdue's Discovery Park District, along with public-private partnership, has been able to move the needle forward. For example, my great colleague, David Broker, along with Troy and Mo in PRF, along with other partners, have been able to move a connected community in the emergent Discovery Park District on Purdue's Innovation Campus, as President Daniels would call that. Here's a particular example of rural broadband e-learning. In Kentucky Valley, about 25% of the rural agricultural households do not have broadband for their children to do e-learning. So this is the creation of a CBRS. It is a very nice piece of spectrum that the government has opened up to allow for citizens to use for purposes like this. And the CBRS broadband allows us to do an e-learning private network, meaning it is not a public AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile deployment, but a private network deployment, thanks to some philanthropic support and this public-private partnership. A third one is together with WIN in the Wabash Heartland Innovation Network across 10 counties, including Tippecanoe County here. We have the rural aerostat networks. These are the balloons. But the company with which we're doing this also has the capacity to do a bit of a satellite deployment. So let me conclude the 5 minute with a bit of a policy recommendations here to the Hill staffers, to the executive branch, to the FCC, and so on. And again, I can go on and on, but let me just restrain myself to 4 bullet points here. Number 1 recommendation, release more premium band spectrum, such as CBRS. Release that to the public telco companies, but also release that for private network deployment opportunities. Second is experiment with shared infrastructure. One challenge is that in New York City, you've got multiple public providers competing against each other, all with their own dedicated hardware infrastructure. But in the rural community, perhaps it's best to just think about having at least one, that's better than having none, infrastructure. And then the business competition can be carried out through the shared infrastructure. In other words, you don't have to dig 3 times. You can still have 3 providers sharing and competing that hardware infrastructure. A third recommendation is to encourage competition among the technology alternatives. The government is not particularly good at staying ahead of the tech curve, and it's not supposed to be picking winners and losers. However, by encouraging competition among those 3 and other alternatives, then you let the marketplace take care of the rest of the steps. Fourth and lastly, as we all have seen over years and decades past, that is not for a lack of interest and need that we do not have the universal broadband coverage engineered today. It's because of the equation of economics. That is, the population density in many of these rural communities does not support a profitable market deployment. And there's only that much tax dollars that can be used to subsidize the deployment. Technology innovation can tip the balance of economic equation to some degree, but not completely reverse the need of such subsidy. The best way on the economic front is to extract value from a diverse set of applications. For example, when we talk about rural broadband, there are 2 kinds. One is providing e-learning and providing Netflix streaming to your home. The other is digital agriculture, using digitization to enhance the efficacy of agricultural industry. And that application does drive additional revenue and profit to the farmers. And that is the kind of applications whereby public or private network providers can look forward to and say, then as a provider, to enable such new revenue, I would like to have a slice of that revenue, and that will justify my investment to enable you to do that. So identifying killer applications in digital agriculture with IoT in particular, with intermittent needs and low bandwidth needs sometimes, in addition to the typical notion of broadband access, may give us a pathway forward to extract value, which is the ultimate guarantee of a sustainable economic model. With that, I turn the mic back to Roberto. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Very, very informative. These policy recommendations are very, very, very important. Thank you so much for sharing that valuable information with our audience today. Now we pivot and we are going to introduce our second round of panelists. We started with a statewide view. Now we're going to move into a regional and a local perspective around multiple issues. So I'm going to introduce a panelist, and like we did previously, I'm then going to ask each panelist a question and then an overall. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A, and we will be happy to discuss that when the time comes. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now. Lisa Abbott is the Executive Vice President of Economic and Community Development for Regional Opportunity Initiatives. She has over 25 years of community development experience. She is committed to bridging the digital divide to improve quality of life, economic opportunity, and social interaction for the residents of the Indiana Uplands region. Our next panelist is Jeff Plasterer. Jeff Plasterer is the Executive Director of the Eastern Indiana Regional Planning Commission, which is comprised of Fayette, Henry, Randolph, Rush, Union, and Wayne counties, and is based in Richmond. The region's economic development strategies focused on the attraction, retention, and development of talent, and the accessibility, affordability, and dependability of broadband are significant components in meeting that goal. Jeff and his wife live outside of Hagerstown in a broadband-challenged area of northwestern Wayne County. Welcome, Jeff, and welcome, Lisa. Tony London, he graduated from Indiana University in 1990 and started his own promotions and advertising business in 1999, which is still going strong. He was elected to Bartholomew County Commissioner in 2020 and considered it my personal quest to help facilitate access to fast, reliable, and affordable internet access to everyone in Bartholomew County, whether they want it or not. Carol Yend is co-chair. Welcome, Tony. Carol Yend is co-chair of the Rush County Broadband Task Force, an all-volunteer group comprised of leaders throughout the community. Rush County is a broadband-ready community and has a 5-year digital inclusion plan, maybe the first in the state. Carol has had an interest in community development for decades, although her day job is pollution prevention and recycling as the solid waste director for Rush County. Thank you, Carol. Welcome. And Mike Perleberg is the new executive director at One Dearborn, the nonprofit local economic development organization for Dearborn County, Indiana. Prior to economic development, he was a local journalist in southeastern Indiana for 13 years, following stories which included the region's economic and broadband challenges. Today, he is serving as Dearborn County's representative on the Southeastern Indiana Regional Planning Commission Regional Digital Advisory Team, which is currently creating a regional digital inclusion plan. Mike and his family live in Bright, Indiana. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. So I'm going to start with you, Lisa. I know you are part of a regional effort. So again, as I explained early, we start with a statewide view. Now we're going to go regional and then we're going to go local. So Lisa, I know that from a regional perspective, how is the workplace changing due to access to or lack of broadband connectivity from your perspective?
Okay, so let's start with the pandemic. When employees in the uplands had to go remote, we had some businesses that have employees that did not have access to the internet. And so much like schools, they had to set up hotspots for them, or they had to use hotspots at their home that had data limits on them, which could be really expensive. And so it created this environment that was difficult for some people to work. And if you think about working from home with your kids going to school, that just compounded the issue. So it created some problems. But I think that if you go post-pandemic, one of the things that we're seeing in our region is that they've learned some lessons from the pandemic on how they can move things forward. And so we're starting to see businesses think about how they can utilize remote working or other access points in order to get the kind of talent that they need. So we know that we are seeing some hybrid options. And Tony, this is for you. One of the organizations in our region, Indiana University, has a policy for people that want to work remotely, but it says that to be approved to work remotely, an employee must have reliable internet service to support their work activities, because it is an issue here. So if you want to take advantage of these things, you have to have just the basic access. So then what I wanted to think, sorry. We are also starting to see some programs where people are trying to bring in remote workers in Bloomington, and specifically through the mill. They are looking at bringing remote workers in because it can be less expensive to live in Indiana than say on the coast. But again, you have to be able to have access to the internet in order to be able to do your work remotely. And flip that around, we are also hearing from some of our businesses that they are now able to access talent that's hard to get in the region by working with remote workers who are in other locations, provided they again have access to the internet. And on the last note that I want to make is one of the things that we see with the survey that we conducted when we partnered with Roberto and PCRD is that our residents are accessing local business websites at a higher rate than non-local business websites. That was one of the results in the survey that we did. And so I think that one of the things that's really changing with connectivity is that if our local businesses are not online and they're not utilizing access to draw customers or to be able to get talent or to be able to work with their employees that want to work remotely, they're losing out. And so we need to work with our businesses and our residents to make sure that we have this kind of access so that everybody gets to improve economic opportunity.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it. And I also appreciate the promotion for that university. So great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Very valuable insight. I'm going to pivot to another regional thinker, a leader in regional development, my friend and colleague, Jeff. I know you've been working around this issue. So in your effort to pursue federal and state funding for broadband in your region, Jeff, what lessons learned would you share with our audience and whomever watches this recording?
Sure. Thanks, Roberto. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. Let me just set the groundwork a little bit here with Eastern Indiana. You mentioned our 6 counties. Overall population of our 6 counties is under 190,000. About 90% of the land area in our 6 counties is considered agricultural. So we are rural, no question. Like more than half of the counties in Indiana, we are rural. And that translates into low density. Low density has dramatic implications for broadband service and being able to extend the infrastructure out to folks who live out in rural Indiana. So as we pursue federal and state funding, we find that most of it is tied to the maps, the internet availability that providers report to the federal government. Your earlier group of folks talked a little bit about that. Seems to be an open secret that those maps are inaccurate. And so what can we do to try to develop more accuracy and be able to paint a better picture of the true landscape here? So we're encouraging our members, and Carol Yeen, who will be speaking in a minute, is one of our board members from Rush County. We've been taking turns kind of taking the lead here, but Rush County has really taken the lead recently and is doing some very good work. We're trying to model a lot of the rest of the region's work on what they're doing in Rush County. So thank you to Carol. But we are encouraging our members to conduct surveys, to ask their citizens, what is the situation for you? What is your home access? What's the availability? What are your speeds, upload and download? What is the state of broadband in our region? What we're finding is that within cities and towns, as you might expect, broadband is readily available, relatively affordable, and pretty fast. One of the interesting points to me was that the cable companies are certainly the largest provider of broadband. More than half of the survey results from Wayne County, the largest county in the region, indicates that folks are getting their broadband through the cable companies. But the farther you get away from corporate limits, the less likely you'll have access to the 25.3 speeds that's kind of the current standard. And maybe now, as we look at ARPA dollars availability, maybe the former current standards. Wayne County in their survey had over 1,500 responses. 41% of those respondents were unsatisfied with their broadband supplier. 63% said their speeds were slower than that standard 25 down and 3 up speed that we're looking for. 39% said that they cannot work from home because their internet is either unreliable or too slow. So to quote my good friend, Dr. Gallardo, in that Wayne County report, he says, Wayne County has adequate users, and I'm going to ask him at some point what he means by that word adequate, but adequate users held back by inadequate or unavailable technology. We're finding that all over rural Indiana. So with accurate maps and a level playing field, or a more level playing field, business decisions are still going to be driven by profitability. which usually means that the densest areas of population are the ones that are going to be upgraded first, are going to be where the infrastructure will be extended first. Rural areas will, in all likelihood, require the most public support and the best planning. So, as with most other areas of community and economic development, planning is critical. We're encouraging our members to expedite a planning process that includes all stakeholders and certainly including providers. But then to be able to communicate those efforts and the results of those discussions to their state and federal legislatures. And most importantly, to communicate the results of those discussions with all the providers that have potential for extending infrastructure into our areas. One point that's come up frequently is, as Dr. Henderson alluded to, and there was a little bit of discussion in the first group. It seems that there are a lot of similarities between the broadband situation now and rural electrification back in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And so, is that a model that really needs to be further explored? Moving on to another topic, we do encourage our counties to become broadband ready certified. We currently have 4 of our 6 counties, and some of the communities within those counties are certified. Again, led by Rush County, who was Rushville, and then Rush County were some of the first to pursue that certification. We're also working on digital inclusion plans with the help of PCRD. And we're working on a new project with PCRD on digital inclusion that will provide AmeriCorps positions to help us implement. And one of the challenges is always, okay, we put together this good plan. Who are we going to get to implement it? We don't have the staffing, we don't have the funding, and so this is at least a first step. The pandemic, as Lisa alluded to, has really changed the landscape. It's accelerated all of these issues, brought them to the forefront. For broadband in particular, and the challenges that we face in rural Indiana, where broad swaths of our counties don't have real access to speeds that are required in today's business. I do want to include a little bit of a comment about the fear that many in public service, but also in the general population have, that we kind of have this one shot right now. We have all of this money washing around. We're not really sure what we can and can't do with it. But it may be our one best chance to make a significant impact and really change the landscape. And what if we get it wrong? And as Dr. Mung just told us, there are different technologies that are competing against each other. We look to experts like Dr. Gallardo to tell us what's the best bet, what's the state of the art, what's going to be the future state of broadband, and how do you invest the resources that are available now. And that fear is we make that investment, and next week there's a huge shift in technology, and all of a sudden what we just invested all our blood, sweat, and tears and resources in is obsolete. And where do we go from here? So that kind of summarizes where we're at right now.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. Indeed, a future-proof technology is really what many people ask, and that's going to be important to consider moving forward. I appreciate the shout outs and so in summarizing, you're talking about mapping, you're talking about capacity building at the local level and regional level. So those are all very, very important
And
points.
absolutely collaboration. We need to
Yes.
talk to each other, not just as an individual community or county, but as a region, as a state, as a nation, and do what's best for everybody and work together, investing these resources that are currently available.
Thank you, Jeff. Now we're going to move into the local level. That's our regional perspectives. Now I'm going to ask Commissioner London to share with us his from his perspective and regarding local policy, what can be done to help with broadband deployment at the local level. So Commissioner London, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto, and thank you to everybody for this very insightful roundtable. I got elected last November, but prior to that, about 5 years ago, I had approached our county commissioners at the time with an idea to help support broadband throughout the county. And they made it clear that they did not think this was a function of government, and that if it was worth doing, it would be done in the private sector. I explained to them that I feel differently, and that I think this is exactly what government is supposed to do, which is to build infrastructure that we all need, but we all can't afford on our own. Much like roads, because as far as I'm concerned, this is the road to the future. The bottom line, as I took office, a couple months before I took office, I reached out to the commissioners and asked to form a broadband task force and to make me the chair, because there were different groups within our community that were trying to solve the problem, the connectivity problem, through the hospital, through our local heritage fund, through some of our businesses. And there was no cohesive pattern. So what I was able to do is to get that done and then bring in the leaders of those groups. And we created our broadband task force last October, I believe, actually before I took office. Then after I took office, I started harping incessantly on this. I figured at this point, they have to listen to me, right? And so I came across a TED Talk on YouTube one night about rural broadband by a fellow by the name of Dr. Roberto Gallardo. And it was extremely insightful. And I reached out, and he has become my new best friend. I actually call him Bubba. I didn't know if you knew that or not. But Bubba, who has been a very good friend to me. And I also have become very good friends with Scott Rudd in the Indiana Department of Broadband office under the Lieutenant Governor. And they have been wonderful to me. I've done tons and tons of research on this. To Jeff's point, my personal understanding of it as the term future-proof, to me, that means fiber. And the reason that means fiber, as it has been said to me before, and until they can find something that moves faster than the speed of light, fiber is our guy. Now, the electronics that run that fiber will change and improve and increase speed, but the fiber itself will be the backbone of the network and should be a 50% and a 50-year asset. The bottom line with regard to policy that I'm finding is that every county has to have an elected champion of broadband. This person has to be elected in the county council or the county commissioners, and they have to work incessantly to convince oftentimes people who have been in a role for a very long time that this is an important thing to do. I would say critical thing to do. And it's not an easy thing to do. But we've had some success in Bartholomew County because, quite frankly, I just won't shut up. And so we had already planned to allocate some funds towards broadband prior to the American Rescue Plan, but we have actually agreed, and our council has approved our plan to use $4 million out of our allocated funds for broadband development in rural Bartholomew County. It is my personal number one goal, my number one obligation is to help facilitate broadband access to every single person in Bartholomew County. They may not want it, but it's going to go by their house before I'm done, or I get kicked out of office, one or the other. I'll keep going until they tell me I can't go anymore. With regard to policy, you know, it's interesting. Once I started, the hurdles presented themselves very quickly. And really the only thing we need to overcome those hurdles is desire. One of the things I heard in Bartholomew County from different providers after I reached out to multiple providers, introduced myself, told them what I wanted to do, and they all, you know, were very excited about that. I have 7 or 8 providers that are very interested in Bartholomew County, is they would tell me, well, Tony, you guys have a law, an ordinance on the books that says we can't plow in the rights of way. So we have to, oh, Roberto, what's it called when you have to push it through with the
conduit?
Yeah, what you can't plow, you gotta
Bore.
Thank you. You have to bore, which is much more expensive and oftentimes. And so I said, okay, so let's work on this. So I found the ordinance, I got with our attorney, and I convinced our commissioners to change that ordinance. And we, as of about a month ago, that ordinance no longer exists. We can now plow in the rights of way, given the permission and the go ahead from our county highway engineer. With regard to permitting, that was always a big concern. It takes a long time to get permits. They can be expensive. There'll be a lot of them coming at you simultaneously. Fine. So we figured out we're going to offer free permitting, and we're going to turn it around within a day or two and help quickly facilitate those things. Policy, the main policy on a local level is someone has to be the champion of broadband in that county. And I thought I was the only elected official on this panel, but it turns out Jeff has gone and messed up and gotten himself elected commissioner in Wayne County. And it sounds like he's that guy in Wayne County. And so once we do that, then people start to listen and they start to understand. And make sure we talk to our people out in the community. They'll tell you what they need. With regard to, you know, actually what I wanted to do originally, to most people's point, and certainly Dr. Mung's point, is I wanted the county to own the network. I wanted to own the network, have the asset owned by the county, and lease it out to providers, either one provider or multiple providers, and they could use that. That way, if it went south for the provider, you know, we just find us another one. That's not really feasible. That's a $60 million project. Nobody's interested in bonding that kind of money. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this $4 million and I'm in the process of writing RFPs right now to send out to all interested providers, many of whom have already reached out to me, and some very large companies, some mid-sized regional companies, and some more state-oriented companies, and also some REMCs, believe it or not. So we're going to have different ways to look at that. We're creating different scoring criteria for that, and we anticipate being able to have a partial plan in place this fall, and we look to have a big celebration with a big party, and
terrific.
We're going to get there. And I'm not going to stop until everybody in Bartholomew County that wants it has it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Great insight, especially that local policy is what I was really interested in. You touched on that. So thank you very much. We're going to continue on at the local level. Up next is Carol from Rush County. She and I have worked on and off over the past 4 or 5 years So Carol, and I know you've been exposed to this at the local level, from your perspective, what are the barriers you have faced when pursuing federal and state broadband funding for Rush County?
Well, initially, that was one of our biggest obstacles because we certainly had less than great connectivity and speed, but we had a vendor who reported that we were covered. So we were just in a no-win situation when it came to getting any kind of federal grants and funding. And when I say we have a task force, it isn't going to go to the task force, it's going to go to a provider. Providers didn't seem to be too interested either. We have some co-ops in the area. We have a wireless provider, which incidentally, we were very lucky in getting a data speed testing service offered to us from Geopartners in Minnesota. And now they are covering the entire state. And so this is really, this mapping is really helping all of us to show where the unserved communities are and that we're no longer ineligible for this federal funding. You're right, it's tough. We have done, thanks to Roberto's coaching, that we have been broadband ready. We have a digital inclusion plan, maybe one of the first key things in the state. We've done the surveys. We have a look. I found out I have a title. I read the Indiana State Broadband Strategic Plan, and I have a title. It's called Local Broadband Champion, just like Tony. and I have been beating that drum for some time. And sometimes this little red hen really wants to do it herself, but I don't have that capability. But I do have the capability of getting the ear of elected officials and community because I've always lived in Rush County. Rush County is small. There's 17,000 people and 400,000 acres of it is prime farmland, ag, good ag. So another reason we need broadband, in addition to medicine and education and all those. And certainly Roberto's impressed upon us the need for digital inclusion. That's not just infrastructure, that's helping people get the devices they need, getting the training they need. We have a local nonprofit, which is called the Open Resource. And we have a guy there dealing with the technology and setting up a digital navigator program. So we're small, we hope we're mighty, but I think all of you have said, all the things that I would have said is it takes time, it takes collaboration and getting those people to the table. I really know from my years and years of experience that you get people together in a conversation that have a similar interest and the problems will be figured out. It's getting everybody to the table. And as another person said, putting aside your own differences and reaching the bigger one. As far as technology goes, I have a co-chair on our broadband task force, Mark McCorkle, and Mark is a real techie, and he says it's all going to come down to satellites. Well, I hope he's right. In that way, it's one solution, and I think he and Roberto even have a bet on that one. So
We do.
I'm not sure what else I can tell you other than it's a challenge, but we're blessed with the good people in our community and surrounding communities, and it's getting these pieces put together and finding what pattern is going to create the picture. We're all so unique, and as I said, I'm a solid waste director. Well, the state tried to unify us and put us in a little cookie cutter. You can't do that. It's like broadband. You can't do that. Everybody is unique. Everybody has a different situation, different needs, a different combination. So how do we work together? Gee, I don't know. But Dr. Henderson, we've asked for an ag educator in Rush County. We've contracted for one. I hope you can find one with that community experience and get them over here soon.
Thank you, Carol. Indeed, it's complicated. So from a federal listening perspective, it's that local capacity that's very, very important. And I keep hearing collaboration. Is there any way somehow that state or feds can help jumpstart or facilitate this collaboration? I think is a common theme that we're listening today. Thank you, Carol. I really appreciate it. And we're going to come back for some general questions Last but not least is Mike. Mike has been putting up with me through a regional digital inclusion planning process. He is a Lido, so we've heard from Lee, who's a statewide perspective, but I wanted to get Mike here from a Lido perspective. So Mike, tell me, how is economic development, including the workplace, and I know Lisa touched on this as well, is it changing in your community due to access to connectivity or lack of? What is your perspective on that?
Well, let me say that as a new and young economic developer who just recently began to dive into this issue when I entered this career 18 months ago, it's been a privilege to be invited to be a part of this important discussion today and work with you on the initiative you mentioned, Roberto. I'll start by addressing that specific question of the changing workplace from a standpoint of an economic developer. So we're trying to figure out what our local employers want and need in a post-pandemic and remote work world. That direction is going to depend largely on the industries which cluster in your community. For manufacturing and trades, those jobs are to a large degree always going to be in person and on site. For back office and admin, there's a lot more flexibility in where people can get the job done, so they can work remotely. For the latter, those office jobs and remote workers, I sat in on a presentation by an engineering firm out of Cincinnati called BHDP last month, where they reviewed the future of the workplace. And just through their surveying of corporate executives, they believe there's going to be a shift from, the pre-pandemic normal of 85 to 90% of employees being on site each day to anywhere from 20 to 75% of employees on site and sharing of desks and workspaces. Some employers will even embrace a remote runs rampant model, where as little as 10% of employees are in the office each day. So I can tell you anecdotally that my economic development office here in Dearborn County, Indiana, has seen an increase in the frequency of requests for single desk leases or people looking for co-working space, more workers becoming mobile these days and wanting to be able to have a presence in multiple locations, whether it's at home, the office, a park, even their car. But a few of us, myself included, have done a Zoom call from our automobile here over the past year or so. So now zooming out and kind of telling you about how economic development's changing in our community here in Dearborn County. Is a lack of broadband a problem for many communities? Yes, of course, but because it's shared so broadly in rural regions like southeastern Indiana, I'm choosing to look at it as an opportunity, and I'll show you three examples or three reasons why. First, there's an incredible opportunity for rural communities who are or will addressing digital inclusion to capture new residents given by the freedom and ability to work from home. Rural places without broadband connectivity won't even be considered whatever other quality of life and place amenities they offer. So if I'm putting myself in the shoes of a residential or industrial developer who comes to me asking about putting a cool new neighborhood or manufacturing facility here, well, they want to develop where the infrastructure and the workforce are. And today, whether that site has broadband connectivity is almost as important as whether it has sewer and water capacity in place and proper roads. Second, improving internet connectivity and bridging the digital divide are issues that require us to work regionally. And in talking with more seasoned economic developers, they agree that the level of regional collaboration on this issue has really jump-started regionalism unlike anything they've seen before. And that's important. Going back to what Ernie Holtry and Matt Crouch said earlier, having capacity to take on this is important, and working regionally is a good way to create that capacity. I found that just like businesses, which economic developers work to attract to our community, internet service providers aren't a whole lot different. They're looking to expand or upgrade their service and aren't as concerned about political jurisdiction as they are about competition in their take rate. I'll give Roberto a plug here a little bit more on the initiative we've been working on together. Fortunately here, the Southeastern Indiana Regional Planning Commission's been working with Dr. Gallardo and PCRD, along with local economic developers, providers, and elected officials across our region to evaluate the issue, which they did with the 2019 State of Broadband report for our 9-county region here in Southeast Indiana. And then jumping off from that, this year, we and SERPC are again working with PCRD, this time to form a a regional digital inclusion plan looking beyond just connectivity, but into the realms of devices and digital literacy. Also, broadband access appears to be a top focus and appears as a top focus as a regional plan we did with Franklin County, our neighbors to the north back in 2020. And lastly, the third reason, local economic developers are starting to look at and assist internet providers similarly to how we've approached business attraction or expansion projects. Local economic developers like me are sort of an ombudsman, assembling teams of people to remove barriers or red tape that's standing in the way of a project. As Llewellyn with IEDA said earlier, economic developers are now taking a much more active role in broadband. And we're doing that by communicating with and being a resource for providers. In the SERPC Regional Digital Inclusion Plan I mentioned a moment ago, one of the things that we're discussing is the idea of a sort of regional ombudsman or broadband czar. That was a term I think you coined there, Roberto, to be that point person for providers across southeastern Indiana. And I think that aligns with what Commissioner London said a moment ago about having a county level champion for broadband. We also need a person or entity to champion this cause regionally and tie in all those county level and local efforts together into one cohesive kind of direction for the region. So with that, back to you, Roberto.
Thank you, Mike. Of course, I'm all about regional, right? So I appreciate that perspective. And yes, indeed, it should help, but we need collaboration, we need capacity, we need all hands on deck. Fantastic discussion today. So now I'm going to ask the general question I asked early to all of you. So chime in as you feel, if you have a unique perspective to offer, which I'm sure you do. So if you had a magic wand, no keys this time, but if you had a magic wand, how would you solve rural connectivity and help your community adapt to the changing workplace? I know you bring different perspectives, regional, local. So go ahead. What would you do if you had that magic wand to solve this issue?
Roberto, I think you might be our magic wand because you keep coming up over and over again. So maybe we're already waving it, but I wanted to put in a plug for the statewide Geopartners testing that we talked about. Talk about collaboration. This is a collaboration between Indiana Farm Bureau, my organization, Regional Opportunity Initiative, Radius Indiana, Duke, and the Indiana Realtors Association, and Cook Medical. And we are working with Geopartners to map the entire state. And so you can take the speed test on our website at regionalopportunityinc.org or on Farm Bureau's website or on Radius's website. It's available widely. And so I would encourage you all to encourage everyone that you have contact with to take the test, because this is how we get the maps that show, us as economic developers and show our policymakers and our community providers where we have need. And I think that that's a really good place to start, trying to use all of the plans that we are all working on. We're working on one, sounds like you guys are all working on one, to move this, this needle forward to provide opportunity to everybody. Because if I could wave my magic wand, it would be that everyone in the state would have equal access and opportunity to utilize it to better their lives.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Great insight. Anybody else would like to take that general question from your unique perspective?
I have a thought.
Go.
Two, I would wave that wand twice.
Okay.
The first wave would completely eradicate the fiction that our census blocks. And that is absolute fiction. Roberto, the map you showed at the beginning of the presentation showed Bartholomew County almost all gray. That shows and I can guarantee you that Harry Potter is more real than that map. And secondly, I would wave that wand and I would make the rest of my county leaders, my co-county commissioners, and my county council all see this as the critical need that it is. If we all were on the same page and all realized that we need to throw the ball where they're going, not where they've been or where they are. And then this would all be solved in the blink of an eye. So if that crossed all county borders, as Mike mentioned, as everyone has mentioned about regional collaboration, this would be in the rear window. And I have to say too, very quickly, we're going to get there. It's going to happen. It's a necessity. It's just a matter of when and how much pain is going to be experienced. If we have another COVID, we need to be prepared for that. School is never going to be like it was pre-COVID. There was always going to be an online presence now. Some people got the taste for it. One of my best friends is now a permanent remote worker for Cummins Incorporated, which means he no longer will go to the office. He lives in the hills of Western Bartholomew County and lives off of a hot spot and pays hundreds of dollars a month for additional bandwidth and additional service on there every month. So that's the two things I would do.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. Anybody else?
I don't have much to add, Roberto, but I want to appreciate what Lisa had to say about the speed tests. I think having accurate information is critical. And as Tony said, I did not recognize the maps of our region. They don't conform to reality. When you actually talk to people, when they do the speed tests, which 1,400 people did as part of the Wayne County survey, and I think 600 more did or so as part of the Rush County survey, you get a better picture of how many areas are without high-speed internet access. And it's not because people are unwilling to pay for it. It's because the options they have available don't have the speeds that we're looking for and that we're going to need in the future. So waving that wand would mean having accurate information about what's available in every location across the state of Indiana.
Thank you, Jeff.
Part of that, if I may say, part of that magic wand is already there in that data speed testing software. It has multiple layers that those of you are planning broadband, use Geopartners. They can tell you so much more than those little red dots that look like we all have measles show. So that's part of your magic wand, use it.
I would say to solve rural connectivity, I would wave the magic wand to form partnerships. So maybe this gets back to the idea of collaboration, but I think it's maybe a little bit more specific and looking at where partnerships can be formed to make real progress. So there's been I've heard it mentioned a few times throughout the presentation today about, harkening back to the electrification of rural areas. Well, who did that? It was the REMCs and those rural electric providers that did that. And I think they're a key to accomplishing this and with broadband in our rural areas. And we have a great example of this in southeastern Indiana. Last year, Southeastern Indiana REMC and a rural provider by the name of SEI Communications, they partnered on an initiative called SEI Fiber, and that's bringing fiber optic to every home and business in REMC's electric service territory across 7 counties. And they're using Rural Digital Opportunity Fund money from the FCC to get it done. These private sector partners utilize the Indiana Infrastructure Development Zone statute to get local government participation and exempt the new personal property invested in the fiber line and facilities. And work started on that program in April. And so far, 57 miles of fiber have been installed as of today. They're tracking it with updates on REMC's website. So that's a great success story through an effective partnership. And I'd wave the wand to create more of them.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody. Again, all the panelists and the deans, Reingold and Wolf and Mung, for participating today. great information. Thank you. Thank you. I'm hoping the commission will synthesize this. I think we've got valuable points that can be extracted. I want to really, really thank you for your time. I know you're very busy, for carving out some time to share with us your unique perspective, which I was really, I've had the pleasure of working with you at some point. And so I know you have very interesting and insightful perspective. So thank you again very much. I'm going to call back Secretary Spellings to join us, and we're wrapping up this event. And thank you very much again, everybody, for this opportunity. Secretary Spellings.
Thank you, Roberto, our resident magic wand, and thank you to all these fantastic panelists. I'm leaving this discussion today really inspired that when bottom up meets top down, I can't remember which of you all said it, but we will get this done. It's just a matter of how long it will take and how much pain will be felt along the way. So it's been fantastic. I've learned a lot. I also want to recognize and thank Dean Mung for his very insightful and really practical solutions. All of this will be very additive to our work and to our report. Let me once again give a shout out to those who are listening to please monitor and join other town halls that you find of interest on other topics like privacy and security. Take a look at the input form so you can provide written commentary. I know we've had some of that in the chat today. Visit our website at futureoftechcommission.org to learn more about both of those things. You can follow us on Twitter at FOTCOM, COMM, to continue this conversation. And of course, we are excited about the work that will be completed here in the late summer, early fall that we'll be sharing with our federal policymakers, because every single one of you has made the point about the urgency of this issue, and we cannot squander this incredible opportunity that we all together have. So it's been great to be in Indiana this afternoon. Thank you, Roberto, for your leadership, for your tremendous good humor, and for the collaboration that you are showing so vigorously all around your state.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon, evening. Thank you very much.
Bye now.
Care.